Welcome to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast with your hosts, Mike Randall and Gus Kearns.
Welcome in, listeners, to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast, where we're always talking everything college hoops. You could have been anywhere else on the dial, but you chose to be here with us, Mike and Gus, and we appreciate that. And along for the ride today is Dylan Burkhardt. He is over at umhoops.com. You can follow him on Twitter at umhoops to talk some Michigan Wolverine basketball. Dylan, thank you for giving the pod a little time. How's everything going on your end?
It's going great. Thanks a lot for having me on, and excited that we're almost to the season here. It's an exciting time.
Yeah, we're getting there slowly but surely. It's like a slow crawl. Everybody's releasing their top 25s. Everybody's releasing their player lists. I kind of like all this.
Yeah, it's a lot better than last year when we were wondering if and when the season was going to start. So I'll take it. We're in a good spot, I feel like.
Absolutely, and especially after Big Ten Media Day and Michigan Media Day. And, we're talking in close proximity to Michigan Madness. Let's talk last year. Let's recap a little bit, refresh the listeners' memories about what went well for Michigan last year under Coach Howard and his fine coaching staff. We personally at the podcast loved seeing Mike Smith from Columbia, your point guard, find so much success on the big stage. Dylan, can you take the listeners through some of the Wolverine defining moments last year as far on the college basketball landscape?
Yeah, Michigan's season last year was kind of a slow build. They had a pretty comfortable non-conference schedule. They basically only played games at home, largely due to COVID, and then they just started winning, kept on winning, and then all of a sudden they just didn't really stop. There was some bit of a roller coaster there as far as there was a 2-week shutdown in the middle of the season for a COVID variant where they basically were stuck in their apartments for 2 weeks, couldn't even touch a basketball, then came back and kept on rolling. Michigan eventually went on to win the Big Ten. But I think the story was really how well Michigan kind of brought together some new pieces, transfers like Mike Smith, like you mentioned, and Sean D. Brown from Columbia. Also Hunter Dickinson as a freshman, along with the experienced pieces that they already had with the Franz Wagner, the Isaiah Livers. So it was really I almost liken Michigan's roster last year to like a G League roster where it was all these guys who were old. They played a lot of college basketball. They knew how to pick things up. It was really the perfect kind of blend of pieces for how unique last year was. They didn't really need that help that a home crowd would give you. They were just ready to go, and they came out playing, and they played really well along. It was basically 4 out, 1 in with Hunter Dickinson in the middle, and that recipe just kept on working. In the end, they fell short of the Final Four in the Elite Eight to UCLA. The big story there, though, was that Isaiah Livers went down with a foot injury late in the Big Ten tournament, which really kind of changed, I guess, the upside for what Michigan's season could have been down the stretch. But still, all in all, that was better than the rest of the Big Ten did in the NCAA tournament. So not a bad year altogether.
I agree. And then, Dylan, you bring up a great point. Due to no fan and really no home court advantage, lack of practice time. I mean, you talked about your own stoppage for your own program over there. Pretty much everybody we've talked to on this team preview this season has mentioned some sort of holdup with COVID. And so it's so hard to get back in the swing. But like you mentioned, if you have the advantageous roster like you did last season with some vets, you mentioned like G League-ish makeup, it helps so much. And then if you just look at the flip side of that, look at Kentucky. They're dealing with youngsters in and out, and they sometimes it falls apart when you rely on the youngsters, especially in last year's atmosphere. And you mentioned I was going to say you
go ahead. Sorry, I was just going to say last year was really not the year I would say to have a roster full of freshmen. It's just too much. They didn't have an off season. It was just too hard to adjust, really. I think, and Hunter Dickinson did adjust, and he was unique in that case. But Michigan was primarily relying on guys who were 22, 23 years old, and that's a good recipe in last year's situation, I would say, for sure.
No doubt. And I think, the championship game obviously spelled that out with all the veteran leadership that Baylor had in the backcourt, and then, the elite talent, and then Kispert on Gonzaga's side. That makes sense. Let's talk some transfers. You mentioned Mike Smith from Columbia. Coach Howard might be into something by using the portal to get these like veteran type lead guards. So allow the listeners to learn a little bit about your new lead guard and some other transfers that might show up on the roster and show up on the floor in crucial minutes.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Both Mike and Sean D. Brown were basically perfect fits for what Michigan needed last year. Does that mean every transfer that Juwan Howard goes into the portal and gets is going to be a perfect fit? Probably not. Like, it's hard to find guys who are really good mid or low major players who are then easy to pencil in as a really good high major player. This year, Michigan did go back to the portal to get another point guard. In this case, it's Coastal Carolina's DeVante Jones. He was the Sun Belt Player of the Year. He's a little different of a prospect, I'd say, overall than Mike Smith. He played more off the ball, actually, last year at Coastal Carolina. The previous year, he was more of an on-ball guy. So he's maybe not quite the pure point guard that Smith was, but I do think he's probably has more raw talent. He's a better scorer, has a little more of an in-between game, and he also is a lot longer defensively, right? He has like a 6'6" wingspan. He measured at the G League Combine this year. Mike Smith did not have a 6'6" wingspan. He was very small, and so that is a big upgrade for Michigan on the defensive side of the ball. I think the question is probably, can he emulate what Mike Smith gave Michigan just as far as a pass-first point guard who really got everyone else in their spots and got the ball to the right place almost every possession?
I think that's going to be interesting to see. It's, I mean, I'd be lying if I watched a ton of DeVante Jones tape last year, but to say that it might be something to pay attention to, that he played a little bit off the ball and they're going to ask him to be a little bit more on the ball this year. And maybe, Coach Howard and the coaching staff goes a little bit NBA-ish and just has maybe a point guard by committee type situation. But I think that's something to pay attention to and could be crucial to the success moving forward. But really, the new faces we need to pay attention to are in this freshman class. They're bringing top-tier talent on the regular, and this class is loaded. So who or what or who is going to make this class on par with pretty much anybody in the nation?
Yeah, so Michigan has a 6-man freshman class coming in. The 3 McDonald's All-Americans are in that group, and the 2 top kind of 25 prospects in that group are Caleb Houston, who is a 6'8" wing from Canada. He is basically a pure shooter. He's a volume 3-point shooter. He might have one of the most boring highlight tapes you'll see from McDonald's All-American, but he's also projected as a lottery pick next year in large part because NBA teams really like guys who are 6'8" and can make a bunch of threes. He played really well this summer with Team Canada at the FIBA U19 World Cup. He also he plays high school basketball at Montverde, which is, he's played with all sorts of great players, right? Scotty Barnes, Cade Cunningham, these right. Really good. He's played with elite talent. So he's had experience playing in more of a college role. Because when he was playing with those guys, he really was just kind of spacing the floor in a way that most McDonald's All-Americans are the best player on their high school team, right? And it's kind of a transition to say, okay, now you're going to play this specific role in college. He's almost done that at a really high level, and that helps. And I do think there's probably more playmaking he can do and things of that nature, but he's going to be really key to replace those minutes that Isaiah Livers and Franz Wagner leave on the wing. The other guy who is really one to watch is Moussa Diabate. He's a 6'11" freshman. He's French and has a really long wingspan. He played at IMG Academy. Really known for his defense. He can guard basically everyone at Media Day was saying, yeah, this guy can actually guard 1 through 5. And that's something a lot of people say, but I really do think he has that ability just with his physical tools. So he's been going up against Hunter Dickinson in practice every day. I think he's most likely to be Michigan's 6th man in a sense where he backs up the 4 and the 5 spots. And I do think there will be times where he plays next to Dickinson, which might work in the Big Ten. I'm not sure what that really looks like against smaller, more perimeter-oriented teams, but we'll see.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it spells perfectly for inside the Big Ten. I mean, especially if you look at the other rosters like Purdue, they're going to play with a couple of bigs. And traditionally, that conference relies on big men, and that makes sense. And I'm kind of looking forward to Houston and seeing if that role that you spoke of that he played on that super talented team with, NBA players that are lottery picks now, and on their in the running for Rookie of the Year for NBA already. Can he take some of that Franz Wagner responsibility both on the offensive end and the defensive end, which will be really interesting. All right, let's talk about some of the returners. You already mentioned Hunter Dickinson. He's going to be on everybody's short list for some team All-America. He's going to be on everybody's short list for first team All Big Ten. He's unbelievably talented, a moose inside. Talk about him and some of the other returners and what Coach Howard can lean on and the known factors that are returning for the Wolverines this year.
Yeah, Dickinson was incredibly productive last year. I mean, the first 2 or 3 months of the season, he just dominated everyone he came up against. People did start to adjust to his tendencies as the year went on. He's very left-hand dominant when he's on the block. And most teams didn't have someone big enough to keep him away from his left hand, but the teams that did were able to take that away. And he never really got comfortable with that right hand. He doesn't really have kind of that post counter move. So that has been a big talking point this offseason is, can he get to his right hand more effectively? Can he be a little more dynamic on the block? There's also been a lot of talk about him extending his game to the perimeter, shooting a few threes, something he did a lot at the Matha in high school. He took 2 or 3 last year. They weren't particularly close. So we'll see what that looks like. But it is something that Juwan Howard's talked about. He's talked about. So I think we'll see him attempt some threes. That might also create some spacing if you're going to play another big and whatever else. The other big returning player is Eli Brooks. He's back for a 5th year. He is basically Michigan's coach on the floor, is what a lot of his teammates refer to him as. He's not ever going to be a guy that really dominates the ball. He's not going to score 20 points a game, but he's Michigan's best perimeter defender. He's always in the right spot on offense. He always makes the extra pass. He makes the right play, and he's going to make it a lot easier for people like DeVante Jones, Caleb Houston, Kobe Buffkin, all these freshmen, new pieces to really integrate into the system, because other than Hunter Dickinson and Eli Brooks, there are going to be a lot of new faces, and it's just a lot of moving parts. And having Eli Brooks, I think, will make it easier for everyone just to kind of find their role as the season wears on.
You always need a player like Brooks on your roster if you're going to make a deep run in March. Somebody that's going to be like not the unsung hero, but the glue that keeps the team together, that fills in those empty spots that maybe Caleb Houston, Houston isn't ready to do. Maybe Hunter Dickinson isn't ready to do yet, but Eli Brooks can do that, even though it doesn't show up in the box score. Totally agree with that. Inside the Big Ten, this is traditionally one of the top leagues in the nation. Which conference contests are going to hold a little bit more meaning and maybe be one of the largest hurdles in conference for the Wolverines this year?
So the big media day story is Michigan against Illinois. Illinois is actually picked 3rd in the Big Ten. I actually picked Illinois to win the Big Ten, but they feel wronged from last year's conference title race where Michigan ended up playing a couple of less games due to COVID. Right. Illinois feels like if they would have played those games, they could have won the league. Illinois was holding up handwritten signs that they should be the Big Ten champs, and they only played once last year. Illinois dominated Michigan at Michigan without Ayo Dosunmu. So that was sort of just all the talking really picked up from that point onward. One of the first questions asked to the Big Ten commissioner at Media Day was about that whole thing. There's still plenty. Hunter Dickinson was talking trash at Big Ten Media Day, so that's all there. Illinois, that's the game that everyone wants to see. It has all the drama, and they're 2 really good teams, 2 of the best bigs in the conference, and Kofi Cockburn and Hunter Dickinson. Like, everything you want is right there in that game. I think Purdue, Michigan might be just as entertaining, but you don't really go to watch Purdue for the highlights and the drama. That's more just going to be a great game. So those are the big games on the schedule, I'd say, at the top of the league. It really does feel kind of like a 3-team race in the Big Ten to me this year with Michigan, Illinois, and Purdue. But last year, Michigan was picked 6th and won the league. So we always think we know more at this time of the calendar than we do in even 3 or 4 weeks. So we'll see.
Excellent. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And yeah, the discrepancy between games played and then that head-to-head game really gave Illinois fans and that program at least a leg to stand on for that Big Ten title. And maybe this season there'll be a little bit of sorting that out, so to speak. And it sounded like it's off to a good start as far as some trash talking on Media Day. Let's take a peek at the non-conference schedule, Dylan. Michigan always has a few must-views in the non-conference game. Is there a matchup or two that you think that the college basketball fan in general needs to highlight, circle, Sharpie, underline involving Michigan this season?
Yeah, so there's a big one, Michigan at North Carolina for the Big Ten ACC Challenge. That should be a good one. Michigan's also playing in Vegas in a 4-team tournament out there. It's Michigan, UNLV, and then Arizona, Wichita State. So those games could be good the weekend before Thanksgiving. There's supposed to be a Michigan-Kentucky game this year as part of a 3-game series that Kentucky basically walked out of. That is an interesting dynamic in its own right. Michigan at the last second pivot to add San Diego State to the schedule. That'll be a fun one also just because of all the ties there between Juwan Howard and Steve Fisher, I'm sure, will be back. So that'll be some fun kind of Fab Five storylines for your December game, but it's not quite what Michigan-Kentucky would have been. A little disappointed to see that one fall off this calendar, but supposedly the game in London next year is still on, so we'll see.
All right, that sounds pretty exciting. And if you're going to talk Hunter Dickinson expanding his game maybe out to the three-point line or something of that nature, you said more dynamic, I think they're trying to do the exact same thing with Armando Bacot at UNC. So it'll be interesting to see how those two bigs are going to match up against each other and where on the floor they're going to match up against each other in that game.
Yeah, and they, I believe, played together with Team Takeover back on the summer circuit. So they're well familiar with each other. So that should be a fun one.
Agreed. All right, Dylan, let's get you out of here on a prediction. Ken Pom seems to adore Michigan. The AP poll starts you guys at number 6. Bart Torvik holds Michigan at number 7. Gary Parrish, who we had on the podcast, has you at number 6. Matt Norlander in his massive 358 team ranking. They show up 5 there. That's a lot of single digits, Dylan. What's your outlook for this talented and balanced squad for this season?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually think Michigan's season will be a little bit of the opposite of last year, where I think there might be a couple bumps along the way in November, December. I think Michigan actually hasn't lost a game in November for, I want to say, 3 years now. But I think that they might lose one of these early games here or there. But I think there's so much talent on this roster that they'll actually be able to reach maybe a better version of themselves by the end of the year. Last year's Michigan team was like good from the start and was basically that same team all year. I think this one's going to be more of a gradual climb. I think there'll be a couple freshmen that maybe crack the starting lineup and change some of that outlook as the season wears on. So I think it's hard to argue with where Michigan's rated. You can pick questions with any team in the top 10 now and say that, they have to answer this or that. But then you look at the other teams and they all have the same thing. So I think Michigan doesn't win the Big Ten. I think they're coming second. And then I think they make another run to at least the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. And then from there, who knows what happens? We'll just have to see.
Right. You never know. Once we get to March, it's a single elimination tournament for a reason. Mm-hmm. And you never know who you're going to run into, if it's a hot UCLA team or maybe it's a Wichita State team from a few years ago, a Texas Tech team that nobody had a big background on. It could be any one of those teams. So you just never know. But I think that Michigan fans with all of those single digits preseason have to be looking upon the season favorably. And thank you for giving us a look inside of Wolverine basketball program and for getting us ready for this season. I'm pretty excited. Thank you so much, Dylan.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Please don't forget to give Dylan a follow over at UMHoops, and please head over to umhoops.com. It's like a one-stop shop for everything Wolverine hoops. They've done a great job over there, and Dylan is definitely a big part of that. Dylan, catch you later on this season, and go Wolverines.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for having me on, and I'll be following the show throughout the year.
Cheers. Salacha. Gratulazia. Arigato.
I'm addicted to the appetite. It's a